everybody, and you're very welcome to episode 5 of the South Tip Arts podcast. My name is Emer and I'll be your host. In this episode, we'll look back at Poetry Day Ireland and we'll hear about an exciting opportunity to be involved in an innovative theatre project with theatre producer Catherine McVicker. Don't forget you can contact the podcast at www.southtipартspodcast@gmail.com or through the office here in Nelson Street where we're based in Clonmel. It's available to download in all the usual places. Just search South Tip Arts Podcast and don't forget to subscribe. Your feedback is always very much appreciated, and thanks to everyone who's interacted with me thus far. The intention is to be of support and spread the word about all the work that can go unnoticed by some seriously talented folks who aren't accustomed or sometimes comfortable with self-promotion. But that's not what it's all about at the end of the day. A town or region with a vibrant arts and cultural scene is always reflected in the broader community's well-being, as far as I can see. And I won't start naming places now, but we all know where they are. I think the 2019 Junction theme of Our Hills Being Green Too is a great opportunity to put ourselves on the map. Okay, rant over. Women of the Rising was a commemorative project to honour the Manana Heron who took part in the Easter Rising. It was the brainchild of artist facilitator Theresia Guschlbauer, and this month, as part of the Bealtaine celebrations, she has organised an exhibition as well as a lecture by Professor Mary McAuliffe of UCD at the Main Guard to explore the lives of these women post-revolution. Theresia explained her fascination with this extraordinary group of women when we met to talk about the project.
Well, to go back to the photograph that we did a reenactment based on this photograph from 1916, which had 65 women that had been involved in the Rising. It's just a beautiful photograph and this moment in time, but behind that there's all these women and all that life and all this activity that took place. And luckily with that project, a book came out that actually told us more personal stories about the women in the photographs. So we actually had something to work with. But the reality is that that photograph is just one of the very few photographs that showed us those women, but there was loads of other women who are not in the photograph, like Countess Margaret isn't in it, Hannah Skeffington. So some actually of the key players weren't in it. And to some extent, that photograph is the build-up of several years of women activism in Ireland. You know, that started with the Land League in the 1880s with Anna Parnell, and then with Maud Gonne that started Gina and Heron in 1901, and then Cumann na Bán and so on. Also the women's workers movement during the lockout in 1913 with Delia Larkin and so on. So I'm just fascinated by this amount of energy that came together with that photograph. But I suppose this project is more about looking at all the other strands that build towards that 1916 moment, where there was this incredible camaraderie and solidarity and sisterhood and brotherhood, because the women were helping the men as well, obviously. But there was this huge solidarity amongst the women, and it was very much built through family bonds, but not only. And I'm just fascinated by that. 1916 again was just one of the many things that happened, like the women's franchise that came somewhat after, but had been an ongoing concern for many years. From 1906 onwards, Anna Skeffington and her husband and a few other prominent women and men were involved in trying to get the vote for women. But there was also, rights for women, and there was also, later on, some of the veterans of the Rising would have campaigned for other things like, children's rights and children's health and women's health, like Dr. Kathleen Lynn founded the first children's hospital in the country, and was very key to try to roll out the tuberculosis vaccination and so on. So and I think in terms of their personal life and what they were interested in, there was also a lot of ideas, and just the mixture, the complexity of the intellectual life of the time is really, really interesting, which is quite different from what I would have encountered when I came to Ireland, first in the 1990s, where everything was fairly a bit rigid, I suppose, and certainly the narrative of ideas in Ireland was by and large, Catholic and conservative, and the oddballs were out of the country, had left, and now O'Brien and James Joyce, and then there would have been the real eccentrics that stayed in Dublin, like Brian and Behan and so on, which were mainly men. It's only from the 1990s onwards that, again, women's voices were more prominent, and where there was this resurgence of camaraderie, and when, women started campaigning for contraception, for instance, and then, we had the divorce referendum, children's rights, and then lately we had the marriage equality vote, and then the repeal campaign. They quite epitomized, that sense of sisterhood and camaraderie that came possibly from that early 20th century energy and spirit. I'm basically launching it with this talk by Dr. Mary McAleef, who wrote the book about the 77 women who were involved in the Rising. So she's going to tell us about the context for the Rising and the women's context, and how women became revolutionaries. And often it was, out of just the circumstances there. It wasn't necessarily planned as such. Like some of the women who took up guns during the Rising took them because there wasn't enough men around, or somebody got killed and somebody had to take over, be in charge. There is this talk, and then basically we're actually now having an exhibition where we will have some interactive activities, and I will be in situ a good bit to meet and greet people and try to encourage them to respond to some of the exhibits. I mean, in particular, looking at, today, what are those issues that one might be fired up about and passionate about, and also trying to think of, what are the sort of the ingredients required to get a campaign going on any one topic.
But some of the images, even the image that you have in your poster of them with their...
Yeah, I know. It actually, I did agonize about that image somewhat, because it's very much during, I think it's from the Civil War, but I just thought, first, it's a very nice image in terms of, the spirit, and they're quite, one is extremely defiant, and one is really lovely. So they really look like three boys, actually. The way the facial expressions and so on.
Maybe that was a case of practicality more than anything else, and also then I suppose they want to be treated the same. So
well, I think that's it, and actually they weren't. So a lot of these women who did actually fight, we're not even talking about the ones who didn't fight, but who did a huge amount of help in the background. A lot of these women had to then really struggle once the new state was established, and quite a few were in financial strait for many years. Some did eventually get a state pension, but it took a lot of fighting, because basically the state would say, oh, soldiers are men, and therefore we cannot give a soldier's pension to a woman, which is just absurd, but that was the reality.
By today's standards, it is absurd. But
yeah.
The exhibition then will take place here in the centre, and
it's opening on the 23rd of May, and it will run till the 16th of June. And it's a mixture of archive materials, a lot of stuff that I have accumulated over the years, sort of obviously edited down to digestible quantities, and all sorts of questions and panels to reflect on, and then a number of banners and textiles, because that's kind of the aspect that I'm mostly interested in, is how banners and flags were obviously part of that movement.
So what's your hope, Theresia, then? What are you hoping to achieve with this exhibition?
Yeah, I suppose the main point is to reflect on, female activism and how it actually has been very strong in Ireland, and is still very much not sufficiently celebrated. Even yesterday I was reading about Anna Parnell and the Women's Land League, and what they did was quite extraordinary, because basically the men were in prison, so, the women actually took over, and There's certainly in the overall history, psyche of Ireland, the women are very much relegated to the background. People would have heard of Anna Parnell, but that's about the extent of it. And Maud Gonne is very much known as, the muse of Yeats, but she actually was hugely active again in the Land League, but also later in nationalist politics with the franchise and so on. And there's a very funny story where there was a king's visit announced to Dublin in 1904, and when Maud Gonne heard about this and noticed that all her neighbours had Union Jacks up on their houses, she decided to put up a black petticoat. Now, this did coincide with the death of the Pope in Rome as well. So I think she was making a statement not only that, she was not going to put the Union Jack up, but also that, there was a wake going on. And this so outraged the neighbors that they called the police, and there was a whole skirmish. Other women were called upon, and actually the petticoat stayed up, which is just, it's just amazing that, this woman who had this eccentric idea of putting up a petticoat, got a huge amount of publicity. It was in the papers and so on. Yeah. So, it's that one gesture, and I found that fascinating, that... maybe in terms of, the traditional history, they're seen as unimportant, but, they do make noise, and, that's what nowadays, that's what you do. You're trying to make noise, you're trying to draw attention with Facebook and so on. So, and she was able to do that very successfully with, simple gestures and to get people behind her. And that's quite a special skill.
A bold thing to do in the time.
Yeah.
Do you think we're not as bold in that way now, or do you think...
Well, actually, it's a really good, interesting question. 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was all this controversy about the Extinction Rebellion blocking the bridges, particularly in Britain, and how inconvenient that was, And some Irish people would agree with it. I was like, yeah, but if you think about, 1916, how inconvenient that was. Over 9 days, the city came to a standstill, and... So, that was very bold and brazen and even a bit reckless, but I suppose it got the attention, if that's what you were seeking,
And it got the world's attention, didn't it?
Yeah. So, the thing is now protests are organized, so therefore they're somewhat more tame and they're not quite so brazen and daring, Whereas I suppose that's what I really admire about that period, and particularly the women. They were quite daring and surprisingly so,
I look forward to seeing all this stuff going up anyway, because I would share the fascination with that bunch of ladies having been involved in the photograph project. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. So you'll be here a bit of the time for people to come in and out and interact with.
Yeah, and you can get some info on the website, and it'll be on Facebook, and there'll be information in the Arts Centre about, times and so on as it evolves.
Perfect. Okay, best of luck with it. As I record, the lecture with Professor Dr. Mary McAuliffe will have already taken place at the Main Guard, but in the next episode of the South Tip Arts Podcast, we will be delighted to bring you a little of what Dr. McAuliffe had to say on the night. The exhibition runs at South Tip Arts Centre from the 23rd of May, and will invite inquiry into these revolutionary women and their contemporary relevance through images, textiles, objects and documents. Over the period of the exhibition, a number of workshops will take place where the personas of the women activists will be explored, and discussions on the means used by the women to bring attention to the issues that they cared so passionately about. Tours of the exhibition will also be available. You can keep an eye on the Arts Centre website at southtip.artcentre.ie or on Facebook at South Tip Arts Centre. If you'd like further information about the workshops or exhibition tours, you can email Theresia at twocandoarts@gmail.com or on 086 822 5054. Poetry Day Ireland took place on May the 2nd, and to celebrate here at the centre, we have been delighted to welcome poet and actor Kevin Dwan to our upstairs gallery with his exhibition of poetry and illustration entitled 27, which also included a performance poetry workshop with the man himself. Kevin stopped by on the day itself for a chat, and after we hear from Kevin, you'll hear one of the poems from 27 read by Gordon Ledbetter, which sounds great, I think you'll agree. Just tell me about the project, and maybe the collaboration thing is a lovely idea.
Yeah, it has evolved into this exhibition from its original humble beginnings, just as my scribblings. Back in 2008, I had a bit of an existential crisis, and that turned into a very productive act of just writing and very cathartic process of just getting all of my junk out and onto the page. And from that I went and started doing performance poetry in Dublin and doing open mic and so on and so forth. Now I'm a bit of a, I don't know if rebel is the right word, but I don't ask for permission. I'm not one for submitting my work for judgment. Maybe that's a failing on mine, I don't know. But I decided to make a collection of my work and put it into a book, a handmade book. I said, I'm going to do all of this myself. And I did. Now, I have a friend over in Indonesia who's an artist, and he helped me on another project called The Adventures of Captain Mac and the Starship Peace and Unity, which you can Google if you like. But what I did is I sent him illustration ideas and concepts, very badly drawn stick figures, but he realised them in full manga prints that are really beautiful. So I got my 20 poems, 20 illustrations, and I put them together into a wood-bound book. I got a steel stencil made that I blowtorched the heading onto the wood, and it's varnished, it's put together with rivets, so it's fully handmade. And it's just something, I wanted to make something that was really beautiful. But then I had this book, and I had no way to distribute it, because I had tried to distribute something before, and it's very, very difficult. So this kind of idea of having an exhibition came to mind, where I'd get the illustrations and put them on canvas, and then put the poems beside the canvases, and people could walk through the book. And at the end of the exhibition, or at the end of their little trip through the exhibition, if they wanted to take it with them, they could buy a book. So I have a softback book, that's €10, and then the hardback book is €27. And I think that's appropriate, seeing the name of it all. But in terms of having to promote it, I'm bringing the exhibition around the country. So in 2017, it was in the Ranelagh Arts Centre, and then I got into a relationship that took me away from everything for about a year and a half, as relationships have a tendency to do. And then that ended, and I said, right, I'm getting my life together. So I sent out letters and proposals to multiple art centres around the country, and with my exhibition proposal. And many got back with a negative result, and many got back with positive results. And many just because a lot of these centres book up years in advance, and so I'm late. I'm late to the table. But I did get lucky, and at the moment I'm exhibiting in the South Tipperary Art Centre with you guys, and I'm very, very happy, and you're all very cool guys.
It's great because we have the upstairs gallery as well.
It's a lovely space.
Yeah, and it's only really been developed now, because it's always been a workshop. But it's only in the last year or so that they've really started to use it as an exhibition space as well.
Yeah,
it's nice to have two things.
Absolutely, yeah. And the lighting is great, the wall's great. Tim, who hung it for me, he did a great job. Yeah. Now, the exhibition has 20 pieces, and they're the size of the canvases, I think they're A1 size, so they're quite big. And 20 of them is a lot. So I was unable to get them all up onto the walls, but that's fine. Tim has done it in such a way that he's made a great impact.
Some of them are probably a little bit inappropriate. Just for this kids' art classes go on in there, so it's probably...
It's funny, right?
What's that?
Because I saw this now on my Facebook feed. Somebody was very offended by a naked woman's chest, right? Breasts, right? Yeah. And he says, I don't want my children to be seeing this awfulness. He says, okay, well, would you allow your child to see an action movie where someone gets shot to death? Yeah. So you're more offended by the breast of a woman than you are by the murder of a man.
I know, it's incredible.
It's incredible. I think there's a lot of indoctrination against it. And it does stem from Catholicism and cultural acceptances of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Yeah. It's nonsense. I think rebel against that.
There's a lot of symbolism in there's symbols that jump out to me, that's very deliberate.
Very deliberate, yeah.
And you're obviously into numerology, maybe?
Yeah,
with the sevens and...
Yeah. There's a huge amount of esoteric knowledge and perspectives that people aren't aware of because of popular culture. You know, these things are frowned upon. It's all witchery and occultish and that sort of thing. But this is what the Druids were into, and this is what our ancestors were into. And I think we've shed a lot of our history and ultimately about who we are fundamentally because we have discarded those things. I think it's time to kind of release the chains of our religious institutions and start going back to where we came from, which is the earth.
I think it's fair to say that like there's kind of a big movement back towards that type of knowledge. Yeah. Because it resounds. There's a sense of truth there. You know, absolutely. The idea that God is somewhere else than here is nonsense. Or the idea that to get to God, whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, or source, or whatever, it's all the same thing. That you have to go through somebody else is complete nonsense. I would use stronger language, but I know that it wouldn't get onto that. If God is to be a thing, and God created the universe, then God must have created the universe out of itself, which straight away suggests that you are God. Not just you, everybody else. Everything in the universe is God. And I think what I try to do with this exhibition and with my book is to show that you are. It's you. It's all about you. And if you woke up to the realization of what you actually were, everything would change. Yeah, the workshop then, Kevin, performance poetry, as opposed to, it's not like just a regular reading, there's more acting involved?
More acting involved, I suppose. Performance poetry is just, it's like, what is poetry? Poetry are stories. You know, you can still read off the page if you like, but it's ideal to be off book, to be able to make eye contact with your audience, to be able to express your words or your story truthfully, and to really just, you know, this is how I feel. So how I'm going to work the workshop is, first of all, to show people how they tell stories already, naturally. So if I ask you to tell me a story about your dog, right, what happens is pictures of your dog come into your head, instances, all these little images, and these images have an emotional context for you. So you'll either laugh or you'll cry or you'll get angry or whatever it is, but your body starts behaving. So straight away, when we're telling a story, images come to us and they make us feel a certain thing. And then how we express our words are then tinged with that emotive quality. So once you realize that, then you can start playing with it. That we can start putting other images behind innocuous words. So imagine the whole room is full of ice. Everything is just ice and it's freezing, and this is in your imagination. You imagine your whole face is just covered in ice and it's freezing. And then you say a word like, I like going to the beach. Something like that. And that will be tinged with the coldness. And you can do that with anything. You can say, maybe the whole room is full of just tar, and you're breathing in this tar. It's in your neck and in your throat. You can hardly breathe. I like going to the beach, or whatever you want to say. Of course, you know, you want to be saying something a bit more important than going to the beach, unless, of course, there was a proper context for it. But how the body just behaves, if you start filling the space with things, that's just one aspect of it. Or even start imagining certain things. It doesn't have to can have no relationship to what you're saying, but it will imbue your words with a quality, and it'll also help you be more present, because instead of worrying about what people are thinking of you, you're creating something in you and then you're delivering it to your audience.
It sounds really interesting. Sorry, I'm going to miss it now. So this exhibition is touring around. So what's your plan after South Tip Art Centre? Are you moving on someplace else?
I'm going to Castleblaney for a month, and then after that, I think in September, we're going to Backstage Theatre in Longford. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's where it is. Now I'm looking for other venues to display it in. I may even... now I've made all the frames. I've figured out how to make A3 frames, so I can make a smaller exhibition for a smaller space, which I think it might be more suitable, because it has a big impact, but it's not necessarily suitable for every venue.
Yeah.
Because it's too much. Whereas I can just distill it down a little bit. Instead of the A1 size, it'll be A3, and it'll all fit up. Ultimately, I just want to share my work, and I want people to read it, and I want, hopefully, you know, just to broaden their perspectives.
You could probably do something audio-visual with it as well.
Well, I have one of the poems called The Last Dinner Guest. I produced that with music and sound effects. Like, The Last Dinner Guest is a group of individuals at a banquet and they eat themselves. Okay. All right, and they started. It's a metaphor for humanity, about capitalism, consumerism, that sort of thing, consumption. And the drawing, what I have, is at the corner of a table. We have, if you look geographically at the shape of the United States of America, I've turned that on its side. So Florida is the lower chin, California is the forehead. You'll just see it, and you see a mouth, and it's big and it's open and it's easing everything. And on the plates in front, there's Great Britain is there and China is there, but they're only at the corner of. Well, we're actually been served up because Ireland's on the plate. Ireland's on the plate in front of one of them, and we have been eaten. If you, it's so simple. It's just like we have how many billions in debt that we have to pay, and are we actually paying any of the principal? Are we just paying the interest? And there is a very true and simple economic statement that debt that can't be paid won't be paid. So if we're not paying off our principal, then all we're doing is paying off the interest. And so we're going to be saddled with this for how long? 50, 100, 200 years? How long? Forever? And who's going to be getting paid? Who gets paid? Not us. Not us. And the money that we're paying is not going to pay for schools or for hospitals or for parks. It's going into someone's pocket, so they can buy more shit. Anyway, we can get very political very quickly. If you want to be here, best be here before the 17th, and it's open all day. That the art centre is open.
Yeah. And the books are available to
available to purchase. You can find me on Facebook, Kevin Dwan, or 27 Poems. Or just come into the art centre and the guys downstairs will take care of you.
Excellent. Thanks a million, Kevin.
No problem, thank you.
Invitation only, it said upon their ticket. So they came to dine, an honoured banquet. With hands like spades, more than heads, with insatiable hunger to devour themselves. What wonderful splendour lay about their chairs, the tools of their feast laid neatly in pairs. Dear butler, they asked, some more sweet wine. Aperitif complete, they began like swine. Their toes were first, all caked in clay, from the fields and meadows from whence they came. What need of these now? Who was heard above the din, as toe after toe followed after its kin. With 1 course down of an 8-course meal, from the stubs of their toes their skins would peel, hacking through ankles with wet wanton gasps. What more could you ask for? Another one rasped. 2, what god? No one knows. They sacrificed their calves. With no need to kneel, they chewed through their caps. 1 whispered to another, I love a good ham. Overheard by the rest, it was agreed, man after man. Next, their sex was shorn away. Testicles, bladder, organ cavity, slurping and munching, mastication so foul. With eager abandon, they chewed through their bowels. Gentlemen, please. They all paused in attention. I welcome you today, my brothers, my brethren. The pièce de résistance, which was keenly out of sight, is now eagerly awaiting the sharpest points of our knife. Mindlessly grinning, blood and flesh on their chins. Whatever made them human would soon come to an end. Please, if you will, the main course will now start. Without single hesitation, all tore out their hearts. With request barely out, one so rude as not to wait, valve and aorta pumped blood across her face. It's so savoury, so sweet, a premier amongst meats. Soundly all agreed, with dessert still to eat. Dripping and sticky, they peered at each other. The acquaintance, the friends, the sisters, the brothers, unsated in their wants. Then began a knowing mutter. From what direction would it come? The left, the right, the centre? Are these foolish tricks upon fool's endeavour? Distracted guests, old friends, now fodder. Once honoured elite, now but culinary treats. Gnashing at the teeth, one final course to eat. So dessert was served, and one might call it just that every guest consumed the other, the vilest of banquets. Sliding in their chums sloshed about the room. The butler up and left the hall to go and fetch the broom. And when all that was left of the last dinner guest, no shoulders, no chest, just a chewed up mess, mouthed the words, "I have nothing to confess," then chewed through his lips and swallowed the rest.
And thanks to Kevin for joining us to celebrate Poetry Day Ireland. The exhibition closes tomorrow as I record, so if you want to see it, you'd better get here quick. You can find Kevin on Facebook and in all the usual places, and I highly recommend you do. Finally, Catherine McVicker is a writer and theatre producer from Clonmel. She is currently looking for people to get involved in her latest work, which is currently in development. I'm here with Catherine McVicker, who has a really exciting theatre project in the works at the moment. Catherine, tell us about, first of all, Augusto Boal and the Theatre of the Oppressed.
Augusto Boal was a Brazilian theatre director, and he created Theatre of the Oppressed. And basically, I suppose at the time he was a little bit of an activist, but its original intention was to kind of shine a light on social injustice and different issues, and to look at people who are feeling marginalised in society and to give them a voice.
Powerful tool then and now, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's used for lots of different purposes, and particularly in kind of therapeutic settings, right? Theatre and education, because it's not like conventional theatre where you're the audience, you go, you watch something, it's over, then you can discuss it or whatever, and you go. It's so it's kind of presented like a standard play, and then the second time round there's a character called the Joker, who kind of is like a narrator-ish type, but not really, because the Joker binds the audience to the actors. But the second time the play is performed, the audience have the opportunity during crucial choice moments within the play to put their hand up and say stop, and have their input and give voice to any kind of changes they think could be made to have a better outcome for the main character of the story.
So it opens up a discussion on, maybe motives of characters, or it can open up a wider discussion maybe on themes that are part of the story.
Absolutely, and I mean, the wonderful thing about it is it's universal. I mean, as human beings, we all can relate to that kind of feeling of, did I make the right choice there? Maybe if I did this, or maybe if I did that. I think that's something that everybody on some level can relate to. But with a forum piece, particularly if it's an educational piece, or if it's whatever its kind of overall purpose, it's to bring it to the next level and allow the audience to engage, so they can engage by, sort of having a discussion, giving feedback, giving opinions, and maybe actors then could improvise different outcomes. Or also, as I've seen in many cases, people will actually stand up and they will become the central character, and they will try different things.
Really,
so it's very empowering,
isn't it?
and it's fun. It's not all doom and gloom. It is fun, because I think it's about giving people freedom as well. I first came across it over 20 years ago when I was at university in the UK, and then last November I went over to do a masterclass with Adrian Jackson and Cardboard Citizens in London, and it's evolved a lot since then. And I mean, Cardboard Citizens, they primarily use forum, and they have a lot of experience, and he was kind of talking about that, you don't say to somebody, oh no, we can't do this, or oh no, we can't do that. So like originally when I was introduced to it, if somebody said, well, I tell them get lost, or that you can't do that, which kind of defeats the purpose because everybody is so different, and even watching a forum piece done in different settings, everybody sees the world differently, depending on your life perspective, depending on your personality, depending on lots of different factors. So the interesting thing I think about it is to get that debate going, and you could have one person at one end of the room who's a completely contradictory view to somebody else, and that's okay. It's a kind of a safe space where that's allowed, and that discussion, that trying of things, and like he was sort of saying, if somebody has an idea, go with it. And will telling somebody,
play it out
to get
and
lost,
see what happens.
Going to give you a better outcome. I found that part really interesting of how much it's evolved over the years.
That's fantastic. I love the sound of it. So it's not your first time using this same method in your work. Tell me about Merry-Go-Round then, which is the new piece.
So I wrote that piece before Christmas. Around that time, it was sort of a work in progress, because it was part of the Rehearsing Change project, which was the brainchild of Cliona at the time, and she was very supportive in that process, and there was a number of groups that we engaged with within the community, and we got to talk about lots of different things and explore lots of different issues. So I mean, that was very helpful in terms of kind of generating different ideas, but I knew I needed to kind of zone in and just pick one solid thing. So the area I chose to focus on was a young person and going through bereavement, because I think that sense of, even as an adult, I mean, like, bereavement and loss is very sad, and we will all inevitably, that's life, we'll all experience it. But you kind of develop coping skills around that, and sometimes, it can be very, very difficult. And I just think, especially for young people, it can be very difficult. And the play examines her experience going through the grief of suddenly losing her father, who, it's very contemporary, as in her father is her main carer, so he's a single dad. And I suppose with that grief, she becomes quite overwhelmed. She's doing a training course, and she's trying to kind of keep her head above water, and she's trying to get on with things, and it's tricky. So there's different obstacles along the way on her journey, and as an audience, you go on that journey with her. So I suppose there's a little bit of an emotional investment there as well, as in, like, the character doesn't exist, but I feel like she does, and I think the audience will too, because again, with Forum, it's that sense of humanity that connects people that we can all relate to.
It's something that absolutely every single person
will go through at some stage. It's inevitable,
Like, it's a brilliant story, and it will be performed here in Clonmel, obviously. Is that would be the first emanation of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, we've got funding from Creative Ireland, and so it will build to a 2-week, maybe 3-week regional tour, probably towards the end of the year. Now, I'd imagine it would be a kind of theatre and education type project to begin with. But I mean, it's not just something that's specific to schools or to even colleges, actually, because I think sometimes with schools there's more TIE in the country, which is brilliant. It's fantastic. There should be more of it. I mean, it's very important. But I think in colleges sometimes there mightn't be as much, particularly of this type of theatre, which again is very empowering, because I think from the ages of 18, you remember yourself after doing your Leaving Cert. My daughter's doing it now, and you're kind of thinking, you're 18, and then you're out there, it's like in your head, I'm out there in the big bad world.
I know, it's like you're just
got
thrown
to be,
out, let loose on the world.
And, it takes time to get used to things like, if you're living in your own room or in your own accommodation, or, paying bills, all those very practical things.
From personal experience, you never really get there where you think you're going. It's just not even, if we could just all learn to relax and enjoy the process. And, take the ups and the downs and go with the flow. And,
absolutely. And we're living in the age of overwhelm and overload, I think, between... and I think, sometimes even as a woman in her 40s, which I'm not ashamed to admit, sometimes... Yay! But, you have to sometimes kind of, just pull back a bit and clear out your brain, as in even your house, why clear it out, you declutter. And I think your mind is the same, and I think we're so progressive now with the kind of realisation that mindfulness and looking after your mental health in a positive way is very important. I just think that period from leaving school into college can be
very confusing.
Absolutely, and I think the more support and encouragement.
I think people feel pressurised as well to be doing something, or
absolutely.
You have to go to college. Who says you have to go to college? That's not for everyone. It's not for everybody, and I mean, people are just bombarded constantly with this is what you should be, this is what you should look like, this is what you should be doing, this is what you should be earning, this is what you should have.
Yes.
And it's like...
Be yourself.
Yeah. So, the other really exciting thing about this project is the prospect of paid work for people in the area who work in the theatre.
Obviously, delighted. We've managed to secure Creative Ireland funding, which means that we'll be able to pay people, which is fantastic.
And at the moment, you're actually actively looking for people to get involved.
Yeah, well, there'll be a casting call going out fairly soon, so we would kind of encourage people.
So if people will definitely keep an eye on the Art Centre's
Page,
social media and stuff like that,
a couple
because
of other arts forums around the country as well. But, I mean, it would be nice to have, you know, a number of Tipperary based
would be
artists
fantastic.
involved. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, Catherine,
all through the Art Centre.
Through the Art Centre, absolutely. So info.
And I suppose another thing as well, sorry, just to mention about in terms of the performance, it would be important that performers would be comfortable with improvisation. And it's actually very exciting to be able to have that opportunity, because you have your script, you learn the script, the piece is like 45-50 minutes long, and then the second time you run it, you have to have that kind of flexibility that to try out whatever the audience throw at you.
Yeah. You don't know what you're going to be asked from day to day. So, is it fair to say then that you know, as an actor, that you know, doing this type of work, there's more of an immersive? Do you really need to inhabit the character more to be able to anticipate possibly their reactions to, you know, things that aren't on the script? You really would need to know your character quite well to, I don't know if I'm expressing that properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in terms of writing it, I did a considerable amount of research. I mean, it was very useful working with a lot of community groups, some who might have experienced some of the issues, but I think that definitely helped to shape the piece into something that's very in touch with the real world and the real issues in terms of, you know, the welfare system, the health system, but it's not really a piece that's about kind of examining and dissecting all of that. It's a piece that's about empowering, because at the end of the day, you know, you can't change anybody else. You can't change, but you have total control over yourself. So that's really what Forum is about.
And you know, the way people watch the play first on script, and then the second iteration of it, they get to say how things would happen differently. Is there then a third aspect to that, where the solutions are...
Well, I know with Cardboard Citizens in London, they've worked an awful lot with the homeless, and they kind of tap into another one of Boal. There's a kind of huge umbrella, legislative theatre, and that's basically where you kind of would engage with politicians and say, we've been working on the ground level with people who are actually going through what you're creating policies for. So we've had this process, and like with Cardboard Citizens, they'd work with homeless people, and then they'd have some sort of findings from that, or recommendations, or they'd mention something about going into the House of Lords with a piece, which is very powerful. I can imagine if you're you know, if you're a politician in the House of Lords, and you're, you know, kind of, if I'm not saying that all of them are, if you're out of touch with what it feels like to be homeless, and then you have a group that's been there, and they're coming in and they're giving you positive suggestions about real progressive change, that's powerful.
That's so powerful. It just sounds fantastic. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. And I don't really know, to be honest, a whole lot about it, but I'm really looking forward to seeing the project develop and eventually seeing the show. And best of luck with absolutely everything.
Thank you. Thanks.
And that's the end of another episode of the South Tip Arts Podcast. You can contact the podcast at southtip.artspodcast@gmail.com. You can download and listen to the podcast in all the usual places. Just search South Tip Arts Podcast. A huge thank you to everybody who took part in this episode, and I will speak to you all again in 2 weeks.